Oh my God, Amara Jones whispered, the tray trembling in her hands, China whispering against China. Her voice cracked the way glass does when you tighten a lid too far. Sir, that tattoo, it doesn't say what you think it does. The man in the corner booth, immaculate suit, rain darkening the shoulders, watch that cost more than the diner's monthly rent, lifted his eyes with a patient, practiced smile. I'm sorry, he said lightly, indulgent as if humoring a child. Did you say something? It hadn't started this way. It started with a quiet Monday morning inside Harbor Light Diner, the little blue and chrome place on Mercer Street where fishermen came in before dawn and lawyers after court. Amara balanced a tray stacked with blueberry pancakes, hash, and 2 coffees to table 6, weaving past a toddler drumming a spoon and the old pinball machine humming near the door. She moved like a metronome, serve, smile, breathe, until the man at the corner booth rolled up his sleeve to blot a spill with a napkin. Ink flashed. 3 elegant Japanese characters, vertical and proud, the lines clean as a temple beam. He caught her looking. He straightened his cuff with casual pride. You like it? He asked, the corner of his mouth softening. I had it done 5 years ago, after my wife passed. It means eternal love. The last 2 words dulled the edges of his voice. He said them the way people touch a gravestone. Careful, reverent, afraid they'll disturb what's at rest. Amara's breath hitched. Not at the grief. She recognized grief the way a sailor knows waves, but at the characters themselves. Her grandmother's lessons spooled through her memory as vividly as summer cicadas. The same strokes she traced as a kid on rice paper at a kitchen table that smelled like ginger and Murphy oil soap. Her mouth went dry. The ink didn't say what he believed. Sir, she tried, quiet as smoke. I don't think... He lifted an eyebrow, expectant, and outside rain thickened against the windows like drumming fingers. From the next booth, a little girl swung her feet, oblivious to the storm building at adult height. Daddy, can I have extra syrup? She chirped, her curls escaping 2 lopsided braids. Not now, Isla, the man said without looking. Then to Amara, with that same curated gentleness. Beautiful work, isn't it? Took months to design. I went to one of those exclusive Manhattan studios. My wife loved Japan, so... He gestured at the characters. Eternal. Love. The wrongness pushed against Amara's ribs. She wished she could swallow it. Swallowing would be easier. But her grandmother's voice, Professor Sumi to everyone except family, rose in her mind. If language is a bridge and you watch someone fall, are you polite or are you kind? Amara steadied the tray against her hip. Sir, she said, low but steady this time, that phrase doesn't mean eternal love. It reads grilled meat lunch set. The diner's soundtrack sucked inward. Forks paused midair. The pinball machine's lights felt indecent. Even the rain seemed to lean closer. The man blinked. Once, twice. The practiced smile sagged. I think you're mistaken, he said. The words were precise, sanded smooth, but a seam split in the middle. I had it checked. Amara shook her head slowly. My grandmother taught Japanese language and literature. I grew up reading her notes. That's yakiniku tishoku. A lunch combo, it's common. You'd see it on a menu board. Hila's spoon clinked. Daddy, she whispered, peering at the letters like they might rearrange themselves into mercy. Why would mommy be a lunch? A burst of color flushed the man's throat. He didn't look at his daughter. He looked at Amara, no longer past her, no longer through her, but at her like a person who had shattered the glass between 2 worlds. Do you think I'm a fool? His voice rose a degree more, startling the retiree in the next booth. Do you have any idea what that tattoo means to me? I do, Amara said softly, wishing she could slow the scene the way she used to slow records with her fingertip. That's why I'm telling you. He set his palm hard enough on the table to rattle the salt shaker. The tray in Amara's hand pitched, coffee slid, heat bloomed like a slap across her wrist. She hissed under her breath, catching a rolling cup just before it bounced. For a heartbeat, he looked stricken, as if shame had punched a hole through his anger and let daylight in. Then the shame sealed. The daylight went. You should be careful, he said, quieter, colder. Words matter. A stool scraped. An elderly Japanese man stood from the counter, cardigan sleeves neat, wire-rimmed glasses glinting. He approached with the hush of a library in the gravity of a courthouse. "Excuse me," he said to the man in the booth. "The young woman is correct." "What?" the man asked, brittle. "I taught Japanese philology for 32 years, the elder said, inclining his head. "Your tattoo reads grilled meat lunch set. It is a culinary, not poetic." The silence that followed was so tight it squeaked. Somewhere near the kitchen pass, a spoon fell and didn't dare bounce. Isla tugged the cuff of her father's jacket. "Daddy." "It's not," he started, then stopped, voice snagging in the thorns of a truth he didn't plant. He stood suddenly, chair feet screeching. "We're leaving." He tossed a wad of bills that overshot generosity and undershot repair. "Come on, sweetheart." Isla fumbled for her backpack, looked back at Amara, then at the professor, then at her father like a small compass spinning near two magnets. She followed him out into the rain. The bell over the door jangled, the street swallowed them. The room exhaled unevenly. Bacon sizzled on, oblivious, and someone at the counter murmured, "Well, hell." Amara stood still, the underside of her wrist throbbing in red crescents. The smell of scorched coffee threaded the lemon cleaner. She pressed a damp towel to the burn without looking away from the door's shrinking vibration, without looking away from the space where anger had been and sorrow was. "You did right," the professor said gently. "Truth wounds pride, but lies wound the soul." Amara nodded, swallowing pain and something like grief, for a stranger, for his daughter, for a woman she would never meet. "He looked like someone who's been wounded enough," she whispered. "Perhaps," the professor said, eyes kind. "Sometimes that is when truth matters most." By the time the lunch rush swelled, the story had already pulled a chair at every table. The regulars pretended not to gossip and gossiped anyway, like rain that swears it isn't falling. Rick, the owner, ball cap, generous heart, bark that had learned its bite from loving broken people, found Amara in the back hallway with the towel still clutched to her wrist. "You want to call it for the day?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You sure?" He crouched to eye level, not manager to employee, but decent person to decent person. "Because I will walk out there right now and forbid coffee within a 10-foot radius of you until 2099. Amara smiled in spite of the ache. "I'm okay. It wasn't about me." Rick snorted. "He made it about you when he slammed the table. But that man brought a storm with him. You can't blame the window for rattling." A shadow moved across the doorway. The professor stood there again, a paper cup of ice in his hand. "This helps," he said, offering it. "Thank you," Amara said, trading the towel for ice in relief. "I'm Amara. Kenji Sato," he replied, then added as if he were setting down a small important thing. "And I'm sorry he spoke to you like that." "He wasn't yelling at me," Amara said, thoughtful. "He was yelling at the crack." Kenji smiled. "Then perhaps you're a mason." She didn't feel like anything sturdy. She felt like the slim bridge between what a man thought he carried and what he actually bore. She felt like a daughter who had been the translator in too many rooms, the one who decoded feelings adults wouldn't name. When the lull finally came, rain easing, plates stacked, chatter thinning to the soft clink of cups, Amara stepped outside with a ginger ale in the damp air. Mercer Street wore a wet shine, a one-lane runway for second chances. Across the street, a dark SUV idled half a block down. For a second, Amara thought it might be him, then decided not to care. Caring makes you rehearse a future where you might be responsible for someone else's peace. She was halfway through the can when her phone buzzed. The screen lit with a text from a number that wasn't saved but introduced itself with money's grammar. Victor Hale. 3 syllables with press releases for Bones. The name everyone in Harbor County knew from buildings and scholarships, and the rumor he'd once bought an island to be alone long enough to miss somebody. He owned half the waterfront and the other half owed him favors. He was also, apparently, the man whose tattoo announced lunch. Amara's thumb hovered over the message like a dragonfly hovers over a lake, wary of reflections. "I owe you an apology. May I come by when it's quiet?" Amara stared at the words. The apology was a door. The "may I" was a doormat. Rick stuck his head out. "You good?" She locked the phone. "Yep." That night, rain sifted down to the whisper it wears when it's ready to make up. Harbor Light's neon flickered steady blue. Amara wiped the last table twice because she needed the rhythm. Kenji left a note on the check. Words have spirits. Yours were kind. And tucked his card underneath. She was covering the pie case when the bell chimed. He filled the doorway, the storm unshouldered, the armor checked at the threshold. No tie now, no boardroom sheen. Just a tired man holding his hat like something you take off before you enter holy places. Ms. Jones, he said, not booming, not brittle, but careful. Up close, Victor Hale wasn't movie star handsome. He was the kind of handsome that makes you believe engineers can be poets, the kind that grows on you if you let it. Amara, she corrected gently. Amara, he repeated, and the syllables sounded like he was testing a language he'd always been near and never spoke. I came to say I was wrong. The sentence fell into the diner with the dignity of truth. No flourish, no bargains, no half measures. I shouldn't have raised my voice, he continued, or dismissed you. I hurt you, and I'm sorry. That wasn't about you. It was about everything else I keep sealed. Amara tilted her head. The seal cracked. It did, he said, a humorless smile tugging. And a mascot from a Tokyo barbecue joint crawled out. She let herself laugh. Small because humor is a tourniquet that keeps a wound from bleeding out your better parts. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I know, he said quickly. That's the thing. You weren't. You were kind even when I wasn't. And Kenji Sato gave me a lecture in the parking lot that would have made a dean blush. Professor Sato does not play, Amara said, and the shared image softened the room. He unbuttoned his cuff and rolled his sleeve. The ink looked different now that it had been named. Not uglier, just honest. A mistake that refused to be only a punchline. I'm keeping it, he said quietly. Amara blinked. You are? I am, he said. Because my love for Lila, he paused on the name like it still warmed his tongue, doesn't evaporate because I spelled it wrong in the universe. But I am going to add something under it, in English. So Isla won't have to tell her classmates her father's a lunch special. At the name, a picture flashed in Amara's head. The little girl with the lopsided braids drawing sticky syrup spirals. She's sweet, Amara said. She is, Victor replied, and the word carried both blessing and vow. She told me tonight that Mommy would have laughed, that Catherine, he swallowed, she would have teased me until I forgave myself. Then maybe that's the right direction, Amara said. Forgiveness with a side of teasing. He smiled with the carefulness of someone learning to bend after being a statue. Do you know a phrase that might belong under it? Something true. Amara considered, the smell of cinnamon pie and wet wool in the air. Sometimes the truest thing is the simplest, she said. Still loving. He breathed in like the idea had oxygen. Still loving, he repeated, and the words looked right, standing next to the wrong ones. They sat across from each other at the corner booth, where anger had once posed as certainty. He told her, not his net worth, not his foundations, not his headlines, but about a house that still smelled like lavender, about a woman who collected ugly mugs from gas stations on road trips, about a little girl who'd learned to sit quietly in hospital waiting rooms and then refused to be quiet anywhere else. He told her how grief had made him efficient and unkind, how he'd started measuring days by deals closed instead of books read aloud. He told her how he wanted to be the kind of man his daughter believed he already was. Amara listened the way her grandmother had taught her to listen, for the words, for the breath between the words, for the places where a sentence leaned toward a cliff and chose not to jump. She told him about translating for her mom at the ER when the nurse wouldn't slow down, about writing the kana chart in chalk on the stoop with neighborhood kids because it felt holy to hand someone a new alphabet, about the time she almost kept quiet when a customer shorted a busboy and how shame had burned her throat afterward like bad whiskey. You were brave today, Victor said. I was obedient, she answered, to someone who taught me the difference between polite and kind. He looked at her, and something like relief moved under his features. Thank you, he said, for choosing kind. When he left, he placed an envelope on the table. She didn't touch it until the bell had quieted. Inside there was a small stack of bills and a handwritten note in neat, deliberate print. Real love survives translation. Beneath a phone number. not his office, not his assistant. His. Amara held the paper a moment, her thumb leaving a crescent in the corner. Then she folded it once and slid it into her apron. Outside, the rain stitched silver threads through the streetlights. She watched his taillights fade and felt, not triumph, not fear, but a quiet certainty sliding into place like a book finding its shelf. This wasn't over. Not the embarrassment, not the healing, not the truth that had chosen her mouth to be born in that morning. In a glass tower across town, Victor stood alone in his study and rolled his sleeve again. He looked at the ink and didn't see a joke or a devotion anymore. He saw a door, one he hadn't known how to open and couldn't pretend wasn't there now. He reached for a leather notebook dusted at the edges by years of keeping itself shut. He wrote, "I tried to carve permanence into skin and ended up carving hunger. The language was wrong. The love was not. Isla laughed tonight. Catherine would have, too. Still loving." He set down the pen, closed his eyes, and listened to the house breathe. In the room down the hall, Isla turned over in her sleep and sighed her mother's name without knowing it. On Mercer Street, a waitress with a cooling burn on her wrist closed a register drawer and turned the open sign to rest. And somewhere between them, a line that had divided grief from grace thinned until it was only thread. Outside, the rain stopped. The street held the wet like a memory, shining, yes, but no longer falling. "Still loving," he whispered to the dark. And for the first time in 5 years, the dark answered back by not echoing. It simply held him. He let it. The sky over Harbor Point cleared in pieces, like someone tearing blue cloth and laying it over the town one strip at a time. Puddles mirrored power lines and sparrows hopped between them, their reflections wiggling with the water. Morning came soft to the Hale estate, a grand Georgian that wore grief discreetly, like a widow who still ironed her blouses. Victor stood in front of his bathroom mirror and rolled his sleeve higher than usual, as if seeing the ink at full height might make it braver. Grilled meat lunch set. The letters were not less true because they were ridiculous. He touched them the way you touch a healed scar that still tells a story when the lights are off. Down the hall, tiny feet pattered. Isla appeared in the doorframe, with her bunny trailing by an ear. "You forgot my hair," she announced, as if failing to tame curls was a national emergency. "I would never," Victor said solemnly and ushered her to the stool. He parted curls with the professionalism of a man who negotiated mergers and still couldn't locate a child's scalp without getting lost. "Two braids? One? The architectural masterpiece? Two," Isla decided. "But not tight tight. Tight tight makes me think too hard in math. Loose genius braids coming right up," he began, fumbling and then finding a rhythm, remembering how Catherine used to hum nonsense as she braided, how Isla would sway in place like a sapling in wind. He hummed. It came out off key. Isla grinned at their reflection. "What does your arm say again?" she asked, voice matter-of-fact. Kids had a talent for walking straight into the center of a room and pointing at the thing adults pretend is a ficus. "It says I make mistakes," he said, tying the end of a braid with a lavender elastic. "And still loving," she added, pleased to use the new phrase he'd tried out at bedtime. "And still loving," he echoed. She hopped off the stool. "Miss Amara said it?" she tested, curious, not jealous. "She did," he said. "She knows the kind of words that don't break when you close your fist." Una Isla considered this in the way children do, visibly, like a small scientist rolling marbles down a cardboard ramp. "Can I draw something on a card for her wrist? Because we poured water on it at the diner, but water gets bored when people aren't watching." "You absolutely can," Victor said, the image of Amara flinching at the coffee's heat replaying like a reflux. "We'll deliver it. With muffins." "Blueberry?" Isla asked, already trotting down the hall to find markers. "Blueberry or bust." At Harbor Light, the rush didn't announce itself so much as materialize. A contractor in steel-toe boots argued gently with a woman in scrubs about who had to be at work earlier. Kenji Sato sat at the counter with a newspaper, pen poised over the crossword like a tuning fork above a note. Rick moved the way veteran short-order men move, part drummer, part surgeon, part hoarse whisperer. The grill sizzled as if it were running a fever. When the door opened and a certain billionaire silhouette framed itself against the light, 3 conversations changed subject mid-sentence and pretended they hadn't. "No suit today? No tie. Just a blue sweater that made Victor look like he might know how to fix a faulty garbage disposal and then write a poem about the quiet the house makes when it's working. He carried a cardboard drink caddy, a paper bag, and an expression that wanted to be both apology and gratitude at the same time. Amara looked up from stacking saucers. The tiny shock of seeing him again flicked like a small, harmless switch in her chest. "Back so soon?" she asked, aiming for ordinary. "With reparations," he said, raising the caddy, "and a peace treaty written by a 5-year-old. Those hold up in court," Rick said from the pass, "if the judge has sense." "Am I allowed to approach the counter?" Victor asked, performing the line between humility and presence, like a tightrope you learn with age. "You are," Amara said, stepping aside. He set the cups down. One had a name scrawled across the lid in the painstaking handwriting of someone who took carefulness for love. Amara. The A sprouted a flower. The cup was too sweet when she sipped it seconds later. She didn't mind. It tasted like someone trying. "From Ela," he said. "And this." He offered the bag. Inside, 2 banana muffins, a small round tin of a burn salve she recognized from the kind of old pharmacy that smells like peppermints and promises, and a folded drawing of a hand holding another hand with a little lightning bolt between them. On the back, in purple marker, "Thank you for helping Daddy even when he was thunder." Amara's laugh lodged behind her eyes and came out as a softened breath. "She's a poet." "Don't tell her," Victor said. "She'll start charging us per sentence." Kenji rose, drifted closer with the paper under his arm. "Mr. Hale," he said, "a greeting and somehow a welcome back." "Professor Sato," Victor answered with a small bow that was sincere enough to be almost right. "You were correct. I should have thanked you yesterday." "You have time," Kenji said, and the way he said it made time feel like a gift rather than a hallway we sprint down. Amara tucked the drawing into the check presenter she kept for events that felt like beginnings, then shifted the conversation where strangers become people. "You said you might add something under it," she said to Victor. "Did you decide?" "I did," he said. "I have an appointment tonight. The artist is local." "Local like Bayview Tattoo on Clement," Rick chimed. "Tell Theo Rick sent you. He did my daughter's magnolia. Finest lines I've ever seen on a flower that won't die." "Local like Clement," Victor confirmed. "And I'd like, if you're willing, for you to check the stencil before the needle starts. I keep learning that asking the right person to look is cheaper than certain regrets." Amara glanced at Rick. He was already nodding with his whole face. "Take an early cut," he said. "I'll tell the regulars you retired at the top." "Retired to what?" she asked, amused. "To a life of correcting billionaires gently," Rick said. "Your pension is muffins." She wiped her hands. "I can swing by after shift." The afternoon wore its ordinary prettiness like a thrifted dress that fits better than it should. A college kid left a $10 tip on a $7 tab and looked surprised at himself. A woman in a navy pantsuit rehearsed a breakup speech to her omelet. Kenji finished the crossword and wrote a haiku in the margin about bacon fat and repentance. On the sidewalk, gulls argued over a fry as if it contained doctrine. In the breathing spaces between orders, Amara found herself thinking not about the absurdity of the tattoo, but about the sentence on Victor's note. "Real love survives translation." Her grandmother would have underlined it twice and then argued with it for the pleasure of making it sturdier. She checked the salve, old-fashioned herbs and beeswax, and dabbed it onto her wrist in the back room, where the staff calendar still showed last month, because nobody wanted to erase the sticky note where Maria announced her citizenship oath. The burn didn't sting anymore. It announced itself like a bruise you forgot about until a grocery bag reminded you to hold it differently. She tucked the tin into her apron and the drawing into her bag. At 6:12 p.m., Rick shooed her out with a takeout dinner she didn't ask for, the way caretakers do, irritatingly and with love. Harbor Light's bell trilled a valedictory as she stepped into evening. It smelled like rain had been here, like the day had taken a bath and changed into something fresh. The sign for Bayview Tattoo glowed a humbler neon than the diner. Teal cursive and a line drawing of a swallow. Inside, the air was antiseptic and ink and the faintest ghost of clove cigarettes a decade old. The walls held framed flash art alongside black and white portraits of grandmothers who wore church hats like crowns. A man with sleeve tattoos in the patient, careful style of someone who tends bonsai trees looked up from his sketchbook. "You must be Amara," he said, as if he'd been expecting her longer than today. "I'm Theo." "And you're about to spell in English," she said. "I am. The client requested a proofreader. The client is learning. My favorite kind." Victor stepped out from behind a partition, collarbones showing where the sweater had slid off one shoulder, sheepish like men get when they are vulnerable on purpose in front of people who could laugh and don't. "Evening," he said, and to Amara's surprise, the words stood without armor. Theo held up a page, still loving in his cleanest block. All caps, one L taller than the others, to make the hand feel human? "Can we lowercase the I?" Amar asked, the instinct of a person who has forgiven the typo and let it stay as character. "Let the word remember, it isn't trying to shout." Theo smiled, marked a quick correction, then positioned a translucent stencil beneath the vertical kanji. He lifted an eyebrow at Amara. Without thinking about how strange the tableau was, billionaire torso, patient artist, waitress copy editing a memorial, she stepped close. She became again the child whom Professor Sumi sent to fetch the right brush from the jar because some strokes didn't tolerate the wrong thickness. The placement felt right. The space between wrong and right would belong to the sentence, a bridge and a bandage at once. "It belongs there," she said. "It belongs," Victor repeated, and the echo from his chest was different than echoes she'd heard from him before. Less marble, more room, pinprick presses, prick. The machine's persistent hum took on the mood of a bee in a clover field. Victor breathed with intention because the last time he hadn't, and the pain had written its own plot twist across his forehead. He stared at the ceiling tile that had a coffee ring and a sticker that said, "Be kind, skin remembers." Amara sat on the little vinyl chair from which dozens of girlfriends and brothers and aunties had witnessed dozens of names become permanent. She didn't speak as Theo worked. Silence made a better room for certain ceremonies. She just remained. Remaining is its own vocabulary. 40 minutes later, Theo swiveled the mirror with the flourish of a man who appreciated both craft and reveal. Under the kanji, bold and even, rested "still loving." The words steadied the joke without erasing it. They said yes and yes, lunch set, and love still. Victor looked. He didn't cry. He was cried out in ways he didn't tell people. But something moved in his face the way riverbeds move underwater. You can't see is still strong. "Good?" Theo asked. "True," Victor said. Amara nodded. "True travels." Theo snapped a photo for his portfolio. "First time I've been asked to fix a translation with an admission," he said, amused. "Most guys want a cover-up, or a dragon on top of a promise." "No cover-up," Victor said, pulling the sweater back over his shoulder with care. "If you hide the wrong, you hide the lesson." Theo's mouth made that pleased line teachers make when a student answers the question that wasn't on the quiz, but should have been. "Bring that kid of yours by sometime," he said. "I keep stickers behind the counter." Outside, the night had settled convincingly. Streetlights pooled on the sidewalk. Across the way, a florist was sweeping petals into a little drift. The air held that after-rain temperature where your lungs pay attention. Victor shoved his hands into his pockets because suddenly he didn't know if he should offer Amara a ride or stand there until the world told them what to do next. She saved him by choosing. "Walk me to the bus?" she asked. "It's indulgent to have a billionaire for a bodyguard, but I won't pass up the narrative." "I am excellent at looming near crosswalks," he said, falling into step. They moved past storefronts that were closing their eyelids. The used bookstore had a sign in the window. "Please return my heart and your overdue paperbacks." The bar on the corner thrummed low, like a chest with a cat in it. The conversation between them didn't hurry. It didn't audition. It wandered the way you do when you trust you'll still end up where you mean to. "How did Catherine laugh?" Amara asked, not to be morbid, but to rehydrate a memory that shouldn't be left in a dusty jar. "Like she wasn't apologizing," Victor said easily, without the frog in throat that used to make that question a dare. "Like her body reminded her that joy's a muscle, and she enjoyed being strong." "She sounds like someone who would have scolded you in grocery store aisles for taking yourself too seriously," Amara said. "She did," he laughed. "Once I tried to pick the perfect pineapple, And she announced to a stranger that I thought fruit had a resume. Did it? Amara asked. In the end, it had a knife, he said. I learned to trust the weight. They reached the bus stop and the old iron bench that had been painted over so many times, the drips made stalactites. The posted schedule tilted slightly, resigned to being wrong in all seasons. A dog tied to a bike rack studied them like he suspected they had opinions about treat brands. Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced out of habit. The screen was a small, bright town square. 16 texts from board members, 3 from friends who mistook gossip for concern, 2 from numbers he didn't recognize that managed to make the same sentence more than once. Saw the story. Ouch. His thumb hovered, then decided against responding on the sidewalk to people who didn't know how to be quiet. He slid the phone into his pocket and chose the person in front of him, whose eyes didn't need backlight to be warm. My grandmother would like you, Amara said suddenly. I hope so, he said. What does one do to be liked by a woman with that much gravity? Listen, Amara said, and don't put your elbows on the table when she's telling you a hard thing. She'd say you're measuring time wrong and pour you more tea. She sounds like Sato, he said. Kenji would demur and say she's the weather he studies, Amar answered, and the affection was so naked and practical, it made Victor envious of a person he'd never met. He wanted a matriarch to let him know when he was being generous and when he was being cowardly. He wanted Amara to have one forever. Can I ask you something impolite? Victor said, catching himself glancing at the same place on the cracked sidewalk, because vulnerable questions always need a prop. You can, she said. I might say, not yet. Are we being watched? He asked, not meaning paparazzi in the shrubbery, but the kind of watching that happens when a rich man speaks to a black woman in public and a passerby composes a whole essay in their head and maybe a tweet. Always, Amara said, not flinching. By people, by our old selves, by the part of grief that is hungry for new theater. The question is whether we perform or tell the truth. And I'd prefer a sandwich, she said, and then truth, but I'll settle for truth first. The bus growled into view, exhaled, knelt. A handful of riders glanced at them because human beings cannot help inventorying scenes with people in them. Amara climbed the steps and turned back at the top as if the bus were a stage, and this a curtain call. Tell Isla I treasure the lightning, she said, tapping the drawing inside her bag. She'll ask you which color lightning is, he said. Yellow, Amara answered. Unless it's forgiveness, then it's blue. She disappeared into the interior. The doors sighed shut. The bus pulled away, heavy and sure. Victor stood on the curb longer than a person needs to stand on curbs and let himself feel the almost audible click of some gear he'd always had and rarely used. The one that turns success into service without announcing it like a parade. He went home and read to Isla from a book Catherine had read to him once when he was sick and arrogant at 23. Isla fell asleep with the bunny's ear in her fist and her father's voice in the room, like a warm appliance that hums comfort whether or not you're paying attention. In the quiet after, he typed a note, not for press, not for investors, not for the part of himself that insisted on optics. Still loving on the wrist, still learning in the brain, still listening in the places that get quiet when someone who doesn't need me asks me to anyway. He closed the laptop. The house made the settling sounds houses make when they're grateful for being full of ordinary again. He slept, and the dream that came was simply 3 words written over and over in his own handwriting until they stopped being a sentence and became a practice. Morning news has a way of finding you before you've decided you're ready. By 9:05 a.m., INRA photo had crept onto a local blog, a telephoto shot of a man in a blue sweater at Bayview Tattoo with a caption that could have been cruel but wasn't. Hale adds English to famous kanji, still loving. The comment section, God preserve us from comment sections, was a mixed bag of kindness, snark, and the kind of earnest advice you only get from strangers who might be angels on lunch break. At Harbor Light, Rick slapped the paper with the back of his hand. Look at that, he said. Man turned a punchline into a PS. Kenji folded his paper with origami patience. The addendum is more important than the original, he mused. It admits the world is larger than it thought. That is scholarship. Amara wiped a ring of coffee from a table and tried not to picture herself as the waitress in 1,000 retellings, where she would either be an angel or a knife. She was neither. She was someone whose grandmother taught her to pronounce the word steward without rolling the R like a secret. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize began like apology and ended like a favor. "Hi, Ms. Jones. This is Wendy Lane from WBLR Evening. I heard about yesterday in the fundraiser rumor and—" She stopped reading. All the oxygen in the room had already been reserved for eggs. She finished a round of tables, refilled Kenji's tea, and allowed herself 10 minutes in the alley behind the diner that smelled like basil from the restaurant next door and damp cardboard from poor planning. She texted back, "I'm at work. Call after 3. She added a period on purpose. Punctuation is a boundary when tone can't be seen. At 3:17, with Rick flicking a towel over his shoulder in the universal sign for "Go take your call," she stepped outside and let herself be in a conversation with a woman whose voice sounded like a seatbelt clicking. Wendy Lane asked backstory with tenderness and the good kind of curiosity. She asked what Amara wanted, not fame, not a stage, but what shape justice should take if justice wanted to be useful. "A night," Amara heard herself say, "a night where people write what love taught them, and we give the cards to someone who will read them. I don't want a spectacle. I want a table and pens." "That's a segment," Wendy said. "Or a movement, or both. Can I interview you and Mr. Hale next week? Not to jaw at the tattoo, but to speak to the addendum." "Only if there's space for the card," Amara said, shocked to hear the part of herself that makes demands arriving on time. "There will be," Wendy promised. "We'll set the table. You give us the words." When Victor arrived that evening with Isla and a tote bag full of crayons because children do not travel lightly, the first thing Isla did was present a new drawing, a heart around the kanji, the words "still loving" underneath in letters that leaned toward each other like little friends. "I made the L big," she declared, "because love is tall." "It is," Amara said, and Isla's face did that thing where a child hears their wisdom taken seriously and decides to keep it. They took a booth, and the kind of easy that spares no truth but also spares dignity slid into the seat with them. Victor told her about Wendy's team reaching out. Amara told him she'd already agreed. Isla told them both she could whistle through her 2 front teeth if she arranged her lips like parentheses. Kenji drifted by and left a small book on the table. Kotodama, The Spirit of Words, an old translation, marginalia in a hand that looked suspiciously like his. Amara looked at the first page. In the margin beside a poem about naming, someone had written, "To speak is to build or break a house." "Professor Sato is dramatic," she said. "He is old," Kenji called from the counter without turning around. "We are in drama." A week braided itself into a rope sturdy enough to climb. The segment taped on a Tuesday afternoon. The station's studio lights ran hot because truth runs cold unless you warm it. Victor arrived in a suit not to peacock, but because he knew some men need a uniform to remember how to stand up straight when they're not hiding. Amara wore a navy dress that made her look like a calm answer, hair wrapped in a scarf the shade of blueberries that would not make it to pie. Wendy introduced them not as spectacle, but as citizens. "We are talking tonight about what happens when a translation error becomes an invitation," she told the camera. And somewhere in town, Rick cursed because his eyes didn't do tears, but apparently they did this other stupid thing that was exactly tears. Wendy asked questions that stepped carefully. Amara spoke the plain truth the way her grandmother had taught, without apology and without weapons. Victor said the sentence that would get clipped again and again, not because it was clever, but because it was a new way to be a man on television. "I got it wrong. I didn't die." Isla watched from offstage with a volunteer handing her graham crackers. During the segment break, she whispered to Wendy, "My daddy says when you mess up, you don't hide. You say, 'I messed up,' and then you clean the mess." Wendy looked at her as if she were looking at a comet that had decided to sit still for once. That night, after the broadcast, the station's inbox swallowed cards. People wrote in the comments section like it had suddenly become a church bulletin board. "Love taught me to pack a lunch for the chemo nurse. She never took her breaks. My husband said, 'still loving,' when he forgot our anniversary, and I laughed because the sentence did not brag. It promised." I never learned Japanese. I learned apology. It is a dialect of love. Sometime around midnight, a different kind of message slipped into Victor's phone. From board secretary, subject, optics. He sighed before opening it because you can smell certain sentences coming. We applaud your vulnerability. We also request caution. Stakeholders have concerns about the increasing public presence of Ms. Jones. There it was. The careful language that coats ugly so it doesn't stain the letterhead. He typed. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted again. He closed the email without sending a thing because anger needs to be walked around the block before you invite it to dinner. In the morning, he asked Denise to schedule a board call. He used the part of his voice that paid for the building they were calling from. He told them who Maya was. Amara, he corrected himself in his head, because names are a first truth, and what she wasn't. A prop, a distraction, a risk to be mitigated. He reminded them that the company's mission included the word human, not as an adjective but as a subject. He didn't threaten resignation. He threatened to tell the truth on a stage larger than theirs. Sometimes the most terrifying thing to an audience is a microphone you are willing to use. The fundraiser took form. Not a gala, not a brand thing. Elmwood House said yes because Catherine had once sat on its board and because the director cried at the segment 3 times. A card table became 2, then 10. Volunteers made signs with soft hands. What love taught me. A florist donated peonies that looked like a sigh in petal form. Rick arrived in a tie he clearly lost a bet over. Kenji wore his professor's jacket like a medal. Before the doors opened, Amara walked the stage. She thought about all the words the room would hold in the next 2 hours. Names of dead and living. Apologies, petty annoyances that turn holy when spoken aloud by people who love each other. Victor found her near the lectern, not touching it because touching it would make it real, and we always put that off 1 more minute than we need to. Ready, he asked. No, she said. Yes. Good, he said. Me too. He spoke first. Not long, not performatively. He told them how he had tried to build permanence out of letters he didn't comprehend, and how being corrected did not make the love smaller. It made the love public. He gestured toward the table like a pastor toward altar call. Teach us, he said, and then shut up. They came. An older man with hands like rope wrote a sentence about his wife's lasagna and the way she baked forgiveness into the corners. A teenager wrote in bubble letters, Love told me to stop believing my worst thought about myself. A nurse wrote on 3 cards like she had extra education to distribute. Isla printed, painstaking, love is tall. She drew a ladder. Amara read a few aloud, her voice the kind of steady that moves heavy things. Wendy stood at the back, tissues out, for once not on camera. Kenji raised his hand as if he were still in a classroom and read a tanka about bacon and mercy that made the room laugh, which is a form of relief not even the best therapist can schedule. When the lights dimmed and chairs scraped and the peonies looked tired in the gracious way flowers do, Victor found Amara folding cards into a box like she was laying quilts over sleeping children. You were, he began, and then stopped because the word he wanted was a cathedral and you don't throw those around. Present, she supplied. So were you. We could, he said, do this again. We should, she said. There are always more words than nights. On the porch afterward, while the volunteers argued cheerfully about how to coil extension cords, Victor handed Amara a small square envelope. Inside a photo, a close-up of his wrist, the kanji and the addendum, and under the photo, printed as if he were making a caption for his own chest. Still loving. Still learning. On the back in his handwriting, thank you for being fluent in both. She folded the photo along the border and slid it into her bag with the lightning and the salve and the invitation from a news anchor to come back whenever she wanted to turn a camera into a mirror. The bag felt heavier, good heavy, future heavy. On Sunday, she took the photo and the salve and an apple pie from Rick's wife to her grandmother's porch. Professor Sumi wore a robe with cranes flying up the sleeves and an expression that said she'd already been told and had formed 3 correct opinions. You stood in front of people and let words be bigger than you, Sumi said without hello. We set a table, Amara said. They brought the food. And the man, Sumi asked, and did not mean the tattoo. He is learning, Amara said. He is letting his daughter teach him. That is the only school that matters, Sumi said. and reached for her tea. "Show me the arm," she added with mischief. Amara laughed and showed the photograph. Sumi squinted, then nodded. "Very good, Worry," she said. "You built a bridge where someone else would have left a hole and called it a moat." Amara leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder, the way she had at 9, at 16, at 23. "I didn't fix him," she said. "You didn't try," Sumi said. "You told the truth. The truth is a room people can stand in. Fixing is furniture. It changes with fashion." When she left, the cranes on Sumi's robe seemed to move in the corner of Amara's eye, like a blessing that pretends to be coincidence. That night after mac and cheese, because rituals are just love with a calendar, Victor set Isla up with markers and sat on the floor beside her, not above her. "What color is forgiveness?" he asked. "Depends," she said seriously. "If you're a grape, it's green. If you're lightning, it's blue." "I'm lightning," he said. "You're a pineapple," she corrected. "You don't need a resume." He laughed until his sides hurt like a good workout. He laughed the way Catherine would have approved, without measuring who was listening. He laughed the way he wished he had learned to laugh years ago, as practice, not performance. His phone buzzed again later with the kind of message you save to read twice, from Denise. Subject: Elmwood pledges. The fundraiser had not raised a fortune. It had raised enough. Enough to pay for 3 months of a grief counselor at the community clinic. Enough to cover the rent at a support group space that had almost been lost to a landlord's indifference. Enough to prove that a night of cards could turn into mornings where people had somewhere to go when sentences ended and silence began. He forwarded the message to Amara with no commentary because sometimes the best thing you can add to good news is nothing. She replied with a single star emoji and a photo of the professor's Sumi porch crane. Then after a beat, "Wendy wants a follow-up. She says the mail hasn't stopped. Will you stand beside me? Not in front? Not behind?" He typed, "Beside is the only direction I have." And for a while, for weeks, for the length of a season, learning how to trust its next one, the story made sense. A man wore a joke with a vow. A child considered the height of love. A waitress set tables for strangers' sentences. A professor wrote new marginalia. A town found itself liking the way it looked in a mirror that wasn't cruel. Until one morning, when Victor's assistant buzzed his office with a voice that made the word urgent sound like someone had put a bell under it. "There's a gentleman here asking for you," Denise said. "He won't give a last name. He says it's about Miss Jones." And somewhere across town, Amara's phone lit with a message that wasn't a star or a crane or the smell of basil in an alley. "We need to talk," it read, from a number she didn't know. And when she answered, a voice with the patience of bureaucracy said her full name in a tone that had never once been used for peonies. The chapter of quiet had ended. The chapter of testing would begin. Denise didn't say urgent often. 12 years at Victor's side had tuned her voice to weather reports. Never hysterical, always precise. But now it had a bell under it. "There's a gentleman here asking to see you," she said over the intercom. "No last name. Said it's about Ms. Jones." "Send him in," Victor replied before his caution caught up. The door opened to a man who wore the kind of posture you don't buy. You're issued. Mid-50s, close-cropped hair, suit without a tie, eyes that scanned a room like they were reading a checklist only he knew. He shut the door behind him softly, as if not to startle anything fragile. "Mr. Hale," he said, not offering a card. "My name is Malcolm." Victor stayed standing. "You bypassed 3 layers of protocol." Malcolm didn't apologize. "Because someone else will, and I'd prefer you hear this from a friend of the truth." Victor waited. Malcolm sat uninvited but not rudely, as though he'd been in rooms like this his whole life and had learned how to fit without scraping the furniture. "You've made yourself visible," he said. "The interview, the cards, the addendum. It's good work." He let the phrase sit an inch away from a butt. "Visibility draws interest, not just from the benevolent." "Who are you?" Victor asked again, more precisely. "Civilian liaison work," Malcolm replied. "Some of my time belongs to agencies with long acronyms. But I'm here in a personal capacity. My sister shared a chemo ward with Catherine." His voice dipped on the name. The way you stepped down from a curb you know very well. I remember the scones she insisted on burning. I remember how she made nurses laugh on dark days. Victor felt his throat do the small fold it did for particulars. What do you want me to know? That a private intelligence shop, contractors, not feds, is digging into Amara, Malcolm said. They don't care about your tattoo. They care about leverage. Someone threatened by your climate initiative thinks you're newly mortal. They'll try to turn the woman who told you the truth into a shadow they can point at. Victor's jaw tightened. She's clean. I'm not saying she isn't, Malcolm said. I'm saying clean doesn't matter if the whole goal is to splash mud and photograph the splash. They've pulled records from a Newark shelter. There was a whistleblower case. She was the whistleblower. That'll be inverted within a 48-hour cycle. Victor exhaled through his nose. What do I do? Stay visible, Malcolm said. Stand beside her, not in front of her. And for the love of clarity, no half apologies. People smell spin and run. Marinate bearer. Thank you, Victor said sincerely, which he did not do out of habit in this office. One more thing, Malcolm added, standing. When the door opens, don't usher shame in. You made a vow in English. Keep it now. He tapped his wrist once, an odd benediction, and left as quickly as he'd come. Across town, in the alley that smelled like basil and wet cardboard, Amara listened to a very different voice, smooth, media-trained, chirpy around the edges of hard questions. Ms. Jones, this is Colleen from Metro Week. We're running a Sunday feature, From Waitress to Widow Whisperer, and we'd love your cooperation to ensure it's flattering. Amara leaned against the brick. Absolutely not on that headline and not without seeing questions. Colleen laughed a little too brightly. Oh, the title's just playful. The human interest angle is strong. Your background's inspiring. You don't have my background, Amara said evenly. You have a story you're trying to fill. A beat. If you don't participate, we'll have to go with public records and... Then go with public records, Amara said, and ended the call gently. The way you put down a china cup you don't like but respect. She texted Victor. Heads up. A magazine wants to make me a metaphor. Malcolm's kind just called you, didn't they? Seconds later. Yes, he warned me. We face this together, side by side. She typed, side by side. No human shields. Never, he replied. Rick poked his head out the back door. You look like you just swallowed a lemon and liked it on principle. Press, she said. He wrinkled his nose. Honey, if they ask for a picture, make sure the light's good. Truth deserves a flattering angle sometimes. She laughed despite the bile. Tell that to my grandmother. Your grandmother is the flattering angle, Rick said, and retreated. By Friday, the piece dropped. Not Metro Week after all, but a hungrier outlet with a different appetite. The headline tried to be clever and landed as cruel. The woman behind the billionaire. How a diner waitress nudged a widower's brand. Inside, photos from Amara's old public Facebook, her in a camp t-shirt, her standing with a protest sign that said, Tell the truth even when your voice shakes, her grinning beside a cake in a church basement. The article mentioned Newark in a paragraph that inverted the timeline and implied impropriety where there had been whistleblowing. Victor's phone detonated. Investors, acquaintances, a board email with the subject line optics that tasted like pennies. He typed one line back to the board. Meet at 4, I'll talk. Then he called Amara. She answered on the second ring, the way people do when they can't decide whether to be brave or practical and choose both. I won't hide, she said. I won't let them frame you, he replied. You won't need to if I frame me, she said. And he found himself smiling for the first time since the headline. Wendy Lane's producer texted. She offered a slot tonight. Live. Live, he echoed. Less room to be edited into someone else's thesis, Amara said. You in? Beside you, he said, but you speak when it's your part. Deal. At 4 p.m., Victor stood in the boardroom that had funded stadiums and endowed lectureships and never once known what to do with a heart on fire. He didn't bring charts. He brought his wrist. 5 months ago, he said, my skin told a joke on me. I added a sentence that told the truth. Since then, I've discovered some of you prefer our philanthropy without witnesses and our executives without vulnerability. He let the sentence air out the room. Ms. Jones is not a risk. She is a person. If your discomfort is that she will not be small, I invite you to examine why you need the women nearest to be. A director cleared his throat. Victor, we're not saying you are, he said, not unkindly. But here's what I'm saying. If you force this to a referendum on my personal life, you will lose my vote and my presence. And worse, you'll lose the trust of a public that has already decided the only thing they'll tolerate less than a mistake is a cover-up. Silence. Then, Denise, of all people, slid a printed page across the table, like a card in a game she knew how to win. Elmwood House sent pledges, she said. 3 months of grief counseling funded. The community clinic added hours. It's working. After the meeting, one director stopped him at the door. My wife cried watching your segment, he said awkwardly. I didn't get it. I think I do now. Victor nodded once. That would be enough for today. The studio felt smaller than television makes them look. Hot lights, cables like vines, the clink of mugs even though nobody ever drinks. Wendy Lane's eyes held the no-nonsense of women who have shepherded difficult conversations to daylight. Thank you both for being here, she said off mic. We're going to do this clean. No gotchas. Thank you, Amara said. Her scarf, deep navy, crane stitched in white, sat like a crown that only Kenji and Sumi could have chosen. On air, Wendy didn't say the tabloid's name. She didn't need to. The viewers had already read it on a screen they pretended wasn't on their lap. Amara, she said first, and the choice felt like a tiny revolution. What don't you want is said for you tonight? That I saved anyone, Amara answered. I told a man the truth. He saved himself by listening. Wendy pivoted gently. Newark. I reported theft at a shelter, Amara said steady. Lost my job. Would do it again. My references aren't written on paper. They're women who sleep safer because a light came on. Wendy turned to Victor. You're a man with a board, a brand, a billion eyes. Why stand here? Because love that hides is fear, he said simply. And because making Amara my shield would be cowardly. I'm beside her because it's right, not because it plays. The producer's hand windmilled. 2 minutes left. Cards, Wendy prompted. We set a table, Amara said, smiling small at the memory. People wrote what love taught them. We'll set more tables. The mail hasn't stopped. If you've got a sentence inside you, find us. We'll read it. The segment ended not on applause, but on that quiet TV sometimes achieves when a room full of people has been allowed to keep their dignity. Afterward, in the green room, Isla visited with a juice box and a solemnness she only wore for sacred spaces in doctors' offices. You look like the moon when she keeps secrets, she told Amara. Good secrets? Amara asked. The kind that help, Isla said, satisfied, and returned to her graham crackers. That night, Victor posted a shaky phone video from his living room. No logo, no music, no PR polish. I fell in love with a woman who tells the truth even when it's inconvenient, he said, hair flattened by his own nervous hand. If that makes you uncomfortable, examine it. Don't ask her to shrink. Ask yourself to grow. By morning, the video had been seen by more people than live inside their county. The comments were an unruly garden. Weeds, flowers, a fox running through. But a surprising number said the same simple thing. Still loving, still learning. Professor Sumi, watching the clip with her tea, patted the air as if smoothing linen. Good, she told the plants. Now we move from saying to building. She was right. The storm had not passed, but they had chosen the house they'd weather it in. The weeks that followed were a braid. Quiet Sundays on the porch with hibiscus newly repotted. Tuesday nights at Elmwood with card tables and pens and strangers who weren't, not anymore. Thursdays with Wendy's segment giving updates like weather, who wrote, what was funded, where the next table would be. But storms like attention do not lose interest. They shift tactics. One morning, a blogger published a leak, a scan of a private letter Catherine had written to Victor, dated 2 months before she died. The letter wasn't cruel. It wasn't scandal. It was intimate. It was hers. Victor found Amara at Harbor Light mid-shift, the article still open on his phone, like a slap you can't unfeel. They took her voice, he said, more hurt than angry. Amara led him outside and sat him on the loading dock as if he were the patient and she the nurse who knows when to tell you to swallow and when to let you spit. "Read me a line," she said. He did, halting. "Don't carry me perfectly. Carry me honestly. Let me live in the cracks, not the performance." Amara's chest tightened. She looked at him like he was newly lit from within by a candle she hadn't known he'd kept. "We don't let them own that," she said. "We obey it." "How?" he asked. "By building the things she named," Amara said. "A place for honesty that isn't a spectacle." "What do we call it?" he asked, and it felt, ridiculously, beautifully, like they were naming a child. "Catherine already did," Amara replied. "House of Honest Words." He laughed wetly. "Of course she did. Then we make it real," Amara said, wiping her eyes with the heel of her palm. "Before the weekend." "Before the weekend?" he echoed, half horrified, half relieved to be told what to do. "Words are a door," she said. "If you wait too long, the wrong people change the locks." He nodded. "Okay, we build a house. And we leave the door open," she said, "for anyone who wants to step in." They found the seed money in 3 phone calls. Not donors, neighbors. Denise, who had not cried at work since 2009, called in a favor from the Elmwood treasurer. Kenji called a retired librarian who had turned endowments into sermons. Rick put a mason jar on Harbor Light's counter that said Words Fund in Sharpie, and by 2 p.m. it had $483.19 in it. The 19 cents were from a kid who announced he wanted to be an investor and slid his coins onto the counter with ceremony. By Friday, a small storefront on Clement, 2 doors down from Bayview Tattoo, held a paper sign in the window in block letters Isla helped paint. House of Honest Words. Inside was a long table, 100 pens, a corkboard, a kettle, a box of tissues, and the grace of spare things. Outside, a chalk sandwich board read, "Come write what love taught you. We'll read it aloud at 6. Underneath, in smaller chalk, someone, Rick, had added, "Pie at 7. People came as if they had been waiting in their kitchens for someone to invent this exact place. A widower with a baseball cap tugged low wrote, "She forgave me the mess." A high school art teacher wrote, "Love is how I rescued a kid by letting her rescue a plant." A 12-year-old wrote, "My dad learned how to braid. It took a long time." Someone pinned a photo. 2 hands, one wrinkled, one tattooed, reaching across a hospital blanket. At 6, the room hummed like a hive that had chosen purpose. Amara stood at the end of the table with a stack of cards and a voice the exact temperature of a hand offered to someone on ice. She read a few. Victor read 2, then stepped back, not because he feared tears, but because he wanted the sound of the room to belong to the people inside it. Kenji read a tanka that made a construction worker grunt and say, "Damn," like he'd just seen a good cut on a job site. Isla patrolled the kettle with the solemnity of a flight attendant and offered chamomile to a woman whose shoulders had collapsed into grief the minute she crossed the threshold. Sumi sat in a corner, the cranes on her scarf nodding as if in approval, and wrote marginalia on the back of a grocery receipt. "Let sorrow speak first, so joy doesn't feel like it has to shout." After the reading, they ate pie with paper plates that went limp if you weren't quick. People stayed without being asked. Someone wiped the table without being assigned. Someone else made sure the pens didn't wander. It felt like a church that had forgot to be suspicious of itself. Wendy's crew filmed on Saturday. Not the faces of people without permission, not the names without consent, but the room, the kettle, the pens, the hands, the corkboard swelling with confessions, the chalkboard out front where someone had added in child handwriting. "Love is tall." On Sunday, a news alert lit up Victor's phone. Board praises Hale's community initiative. A quote from the chair, "We support any effort that strengthens the human fabric of our city." It tasted like optics and aspiration. Victor decided to accept the sentence as a first draft of sincerity and trust, what repetition might make of it. That afternoon, Victor's mother arrived at Harbor Light unannounced. She had Catherine's eyebrows in a purse that could anchor a small boat. Amara stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had seen better bleach. "Mrs. Hale," she said, and felt like she was stepping into a test she hadn't studied for, but might pass if she remembered the subject was humanity. Elaine, the older woman corrected, then took Amara in, face, posture, steadiness, with a glance that had mother love's efficiency. Come sit, she said, and did not wait to be obeyed. They took a booth. The older woman set her purse beside her like a silent chaperone. I saw you on the television, Elaine said. My bridge group stopped talking long enough to listen. That's a miracle. I'm grateful, Amara said. You were dignified without being dull, Elaine continued. That's rarer than honesty. She reached into her purse and slid across a folded note. Catherine would have loved the way you argue for truth. She used to say arguments aren't fights. They're architecture. Amara unfolded the paper. Catherine's handwriting, looping, fierce, legible, a woman who didn't believe in secrets unless they were gifts. If he tries to carry me perfectly, scold him. If he starts to use me as a moral pediment, knock him down to the porch where real people sit. Amara laughed out loud, helplessly, like someone had just told her a joke from the other room. She would have loved you, Elaine said, eyes kind. I don't say that lightly. I don't take it lightly, Amara replied, throat tight. Do right by each other, Elaine said, standing with joints that had started to narrate their opinions. And don't let the house become a museum. We won't, Amara promised, and felt the vow land not like a performance, but like a brick that belonged in the wall. A week later, the House of Honest Words hosted a night they hadn't planned for. Mending. Not an advertised theme. Someone scrawled it on a post-it at 5:58 and stuck it near the kettle. The room filled with an unusual population. Men in suits that looked like they'd just come from a table where someone said fiduciary. Teenagers in hoodies who stood at the back with crossed arms and watched long enough to decide to stay. A nurse still in scrubs sneaking protein bites between sentences. Victor spoke once, only to say, I brought the power bill. Laughter, itself a mending, ran the room. Then, a man with a sheriff's star on his belt stood and said, I told my son to stop crying when his mother died. I was wrong. He is teaching me now. He sat down hard. A woman with a lawyer's spine said, I won a case and lost my marriage because I forgot what couldn't be cross-examined. A girl of 14 read from her phone. I looked up grief stages and realized the chart was written by someone who forgot about homework in pep rallies and cafeteria trays. My chart looks different. Kenji read a tanka that was really a koan. If bacon forgives, the pan that spits hot and mean, who am I? Rough hand? To scold the grease for being what kept us fed through winter. After, as chairs scraped and pie reappeared like manna, Malcolm leaned against the doorframe. He had the look of a man who was glad his warning hadn't turned into injury. You built something on time, he said to Victor. Amara did, Victor corrected. Good answer, Malcolm said, pushing away from the frame. Keep telling the truth or I'll have to come back and complain. What about the ones still digging? Victor asked. They read the room, Malcolm said, nodding toward the house, and lost interest. Shame doesn't eat where it can't perform. Thank you, Victor said. Tell your mother I remember the scones, Malcolm replied, and left with the same ghost tread as before. Not all heat now came from headlines. Some came from a gentler fire. On a Thursday evening that pretended to be Friday, after Isla had built a card castle on the living room rug and decreed that no loud thoughts could come near it, Victor and Amara sat on the porch with glasses of iced tea sweating like sinners. The crickets had tuned up. The hibiscus was bragging. What are we doing? Amara asked, the question not a trap, but a broom clearing the porch of assumptions. We're not rushing, Victor said. We're not hiding. We're building slowly. And if we get asked to perform, she pressed. We decline, he said. And if we forget, your grandmother will knock me down to the porch. Amara smiled, picturing Sumi wielding a broom like a ceremonial staff. We need rules, she said. For us. Not to make it smaller, to make it honest. Okay, he said, leaning forward. Rule 1. No replacing, she said. Catherine isn't a vacancy. Love isn't a musical chair. Agreed, he said, relief in the admission. Rule 2, she continued. Isla has the veto on optics. If she calls something performing, we stop. She will enjoy the power, he said. Rule 3, she said. We keep the house a house. If donors want their names on the walls, they can put them on the brooms. He laughed. We'll embroider them on the mop heads. Rule 4, she added. We don't apologize for tenderness. He grew quiet, then nodded. That one will save me. And rule 5, she said, softer, the sentence revealing itself as she spoke it. We will tell the truth even when it means we pause. We will, he said, and meant it in a way that made his chest ache the way muscles ache when you finally use them right. That night, after Isla fell asleep in a fortress of index cards and crayons, Victor found, between two of Catherine's letters, an envelope he hadn't opened. The handwriting on the front was his own, long ago, addressed to himself. Open when the house feels real. He laughed, shook his head, tore it carefully. Inside, a younger man who had not yet learned to say I don't know had written, if you ever find a way to let love be messy in public without taking its clothes off, choose it. If you ever meet someone who tells you the truth and doesn't hang it like a trophy, marry her. He sat very still. He did not run to the porch. He did not make it a scene. He folded the letter back along its old crease and tucked it away. Then he breathed the kind of breath that knows what it wants and respects the calendar. The next weeks did their work. The house collected sentences like a bank collects deposits it intends to loan out in better form. Wendy ran a monthly segment called Addendum that pointed people to rooms where honesty paid rent. The board shifted, not because Victor thumped it into place, but because Denise became a quiet coalition in sensible shoes, and the directors discovered that being applauded for humanity felt better than being tolerated for wealth. Elaine began bringing Sumi soup, and the two women argued in the way grandmothers argue when they recognize each other as peers. Sharpened kindness. Kenji started a side project in the back room of the house, where teenagers wrote micro-essays on index cards and then read them to the kettle before reading them aloud to humans. Isla lost a tooth and declared she was now qualified to edit. One night, after a reading where a man returned a ring to the bowl in the center of the table, like a confession, and left with two other men's hands on his shoulders, Victor walked Amara home. He fixed the sticky apartment door Sumi had always said was character. He didn't try to push past the rhythm they'd set. On the threshold, neither performing nor withdrawing, he said, I'm ready to put a ring somewhere it belongs. Where? She asked, teasing, testing, trembling in a way you can't see and only feel when your nerves have finally agreed with your heart. In time, he said, with you, when we both know the house doesn't need a spectacle to keep standing. She reached up and touched his face, thumb brushing the new sentence on his wrist as if to remind the old joke it was welcome here. Soon, she said, but not because of them, because of us. Because of us, he repeated, and the porch light chose that exact moment to flicker and then commit to steady. Spring in Harbor Point is not shy. Dogwoods throw confetti. The harbor wears sunshine like a shirt that finally fits. At Harbor Light, the creaky door announces the morning parade. Contractors, nurses, a young couple dividing pancakes like a negotiation. Kenji with a new pen he pretends isn't a wand. The house of honest words has survived what kills most beginnings. Inertia, bitterness, success. It isn't a museum, it's a kitchen. People come in and do the work of staying human. On the corkboard, love taught me to leave the group chat when it made me cruel. I forgave my father while changing his oil. He didn't know. Maybe he didn't need to. Grief is a roommate that cleans the bathroom at 2 a.m. and slams the cabinets at 3. On the kettle, a handwritten sign in Isla's careful block letters. Please return the tea, she gets homesick. Kenji teaches a Wednesday session he calls margins, where people copy a sentence they love into a notebook and then write what they'd say to it if it were alive. Sometimes the sentence is scripture, sometimes it's a line from a rom-com. Once it was a menu item. No one laughed. Wendy's addendum travels now. Other towns, other tables. The kid a tote bag with pens and a tablecloth. She focuses on the cards more than the couple because she is too good at her job to pedestal anybody long enough to block the view. On a Tuesday morning that smells like orange peel and printer ink, Denise brings in a stack of envelopes like fat birds. Mail, she announces, dumping them on the house table. I filtered out the crazies and the coupons. Amara sorts. Most are sweet. One is a check so generous she says, oh, and has to sit down. One is a letter from a teenage girl in a county 3 hours away. My mom and me watch your thing. We wrote our cards at home because there's no house here. We're making one in the church basement. Would you come? I make pie. It's not good, but it's honest. Amara circles the date. We'll go. Victor, who has learned that real power mostly looks like moving chairs and ordering pizza, starts to plan the drive. Elaine calls Sumi. You'll want to bring your scarf, she says. The air conditioning in church basements is profligate. Sumi cackles. Profligate? Elaine, you've been reading the dictionary for fun again. They keep going. The world does not improve in a straight line because the world is not a spreadsheet. There are weeks when political storms try to turn tenderness into a wedge. There are days when a blog decides to be hungry again and makes a meal of a private photo. But the house has taught them the only tactic that works on weather. Don't pretend it isn't raining. Offer towels. Keep the door open. Isla loses another tooth and draws a new sign. Love is taller. She watches her father make speeches that are shorter and truer than the ones he used to make, and she decides to keep him. She sits with Amara on the porch with the hibiscus and learns to knit with her fingers. Her first scarf looks like a snake that made bad choices. Amara wears it anyway. Fashion is the kindness you do on purpose. One Saturday night, Victor cooks dinner without burning anything but the toast, and they call it rustic and mean it. After dishes, after Isla's insistence that brooms also deserve names, this one is Charlotte. After Kenji texts a photo of a haiku a 12-year-old wrote that made everybody gasp, Victor steps out onto the porch and returns with a small box. No spectacle, he says, thumb worrying the edge because even brave men get human at thresholds. No cameras. No balloons shaped like letters. Amara's heart thumps once. Big. Okay. He opens the box. The ring is simple, brushed gold, the humbler kind. Engraved inside, still loving. On the outside of the band in tiny precise script, a single crane. I don't want to move on from Catherine, he says, voice steady in the way of decisions you've rehearsed with your breath. I want to move forward with you. I believe those are different. I believe we know the difference because you made me learn it one sentence at a time. Amara looks at the ring. She looks at the man. She looks at the house that holds a child who is humming to her stuffed animals in the other room, like a choir director who hasn't met the word discourage. She looks at the hibiscus, which is showing off again. Yes, she says, and the word doesn't ring like a bell. It lands like a plank in a bridge. Yes, on our rules. Beside, not behind. With the house open, with no one replaced and nothing performed. He slides the ring onto her finger. It sits like it has been practicing. They both exhale. A breeze moves through the porch screen and does the thing breezes do when they join scenes like this. Underline without narrating. Inside, Isla has not kept her vow not to eavesdrop. She bursts out, wearing a blanket for a cape. Does this mean I get to be the flower kid but also carry the pens? It means, Amara says, kneeling to put her face level with a future that makes her eyes sting. You will tell us if anything we do starts to look like a show, and you will draw all the lightning. Blue, Isla says solemnly. Because forgiveness. Because forgiveness, Victor echoes, and kisses his daughter's head, then his fiancé's hand, where the ring sits against pulse. They do not post it. They do not call Wendy. They tell Elaine and Sumi, who convene a small summit of matriarchs on the porch and declare, after eating too many lemon bars, that the ceremony will be in a garden with folding chairs and a microphone that works exactly long enough for 2 vows and then declines to function so everyone has to lean in. They're joking. They're not. In the months that follow, the house clones itself quietly, not franchised, not owned, not brand managed, imitated by people who watched a door open and realized they could build one too. A barber shop in Newark sets a jar of pens next to the jar of combs. A firehouse in Omaha keeps a corkboard by the coffee. A classroom in El Paso hangs a sign above a whiteboard. What love taught me before lunch. Kenji publishes a small book of tanka he refuses to call a book. He says it is a napkin someone wrote a grocery list on and then found poetry between eggs and dish soap. It goes mini viral in the odd, perfect way things travel when they are too true to be marketed. He gets a voicemail from a teenager who says he stopped punching lockers. Wendy wins an award she doesn't attend because she's in a church basement 3 hours away eating a pie a girl baked that is not good and is honest. She texts Amara a photo. The caption reads, "We built a table. They brought sentences. You were right. The board stops sending emails with optics in the subject line and starts sending checks that fund more tables. Denise is rumored to have orchestrated a quiet coup. She denies everything and bakes brownies that taste like plausible deniability. And on a Saturday morning that smells like cut grass and sunscreen, in a garden with folding chairs, under a sky that has decided to allow no drama that isn't botanical, two people make sentences out loud. They are short. They are clear. They do not try to be literature because they already live in a house full of it. I promise to tell the truth, Victor says, and to listen when it isn't mine. I promise to carry love honestly, Amara says, and to scold you if you try to carry it perfectly. Sumi says, amen, too loudly, and then says, oops, into the mic, and then says, well, let it be written. And everyone laughs and then is quiet the way people get quiet when holiness stops asking permission to be noticed. Ela scatters petals in a pattern only she understands and declares that love is now as tall as the steeple and as long as a grocery list. She holds the pens. She is very serious. Later on the porch, after the cake that wasn't rustic on purpose but qualified, after Elaine told an outrageous story about Catherine that had 3 punchlines and a kindness, after Kenji made a toast with unsweet tea and said something about bacon that made strangers high-five, Victor and Amara sit with their feet bare and the house visible through the trees like a small lit truth. Still loving, he says. Still learning, she adds. Still listening, they say together, and the screen door sighs and the hibiscus nods in the air. The ordinary, beautiful, unremarkable air fills their lungs like an agreement that doesn't need to be notarized. That night, Amara opens a new notebook. On the first page, she writes a sentence for the wall. It isn't fancy. It isn't afraid. It's written with the pen Isla left on the porch rail. Love made room and then told the truth about the mess. We kept the door open. She pins it to the board. In the morning, someone will read it out loud. Someone will add a card that says something better. The kettle will hiss. The bell at Harbor Light will jingle. The world will be the same and bearably different. And in the corner of a wrist under a cuff, 3 characters that once announced lunch will stand beside 2 English words that announce a vow. The joke will not be erased. It will be held. It will be redeemed, not by grammar, but by living. Because the thing the town learned, the thing Catherine wrote and Sumi underlined, and Kenji turned into poems, and Wendy televised, and Isla summed up in crayons, and the board grudgingly funded, and Victor finally practiced, and Amar has always known, is simple enough to fit on a card and strong enough to hold a city. Truth is love when it leaves room. Love is truth when it stays.